Question 1. A behavior analyst is asked to provide services for a client who lives in a remote area. The behavior analyst is licensed to practice in the state where the client resides, but the analyst primarily works with a different population and has limited experience with the specific complex needs presented by this client. What is the most ethical course of action for the behavior analyst? A. Accept the case but seek immediate supervision from a peer experienced with this population. B. Decline the case because they lack competence with the specific client needs. C. Accept the case and rely on general ABA principles, learning as they go. D. Refer the client to a more experienced colleague if one is available and the client agrees. Answer. D. Refer the client to a more experienced colleague if one is available and the client agrees. This scenario tests the ethical principle of maintaining competence and practicing within one's scope. The key phrase, limited experience with the specific complex needs, indicates a potential gap in competence. Ethical practice requires behavior analysts to provide services only within their boundaries of competence, which includes experience with specific populations and needs. The most responsible action is to decline the case if competence is lacking, and, if possible and consented to, refer the client to someone who is better suited to provide the necessary expertise. Simply accepting the case or seeking supervision without prior competence in this complex area for this population is insufficient and potentially harmful. A simple way to remember this is that saying no or referring out is often the most ethical choice when a case is beyond your skill set, prioritizing the client's best interest over your desire to help or gain experience. Question 2. A behavior analyst receives a subpoena requesting confidential client records. What is the first step the behavior analyst should take? A. Immediately release the records as requested by the subpoena. B. Contact the client or their legal guardian to inform them about the subpoena and seek their consent or guidance. C. Contact their lawyer for legal advice. D. Contact the issuing court to clarify the scope of the subpoena. Answer. B. Contact the client or their legal guardian to inform them about the subpoena and seek their consent or guidance. This question is about handling confidential information when faced with a legal demand like a subpoena. The critical first step when confidentiality is challenged by a legal process is to communicate with the client or their legal representative. This allows them to understand the request for their information and decide how they wish to proceed, such as attempting to quash the subpoena or providing consent for disclosure. While consulting a lawyer is important and understanding the subpoena's scope is relevant, the primary ethical duty regarding confidentiality requires involving the client regarding access to their private information before any disclosure occurs, unless legally prohibited from doing so. Remember, client confidentiality is paramount, and they have the right to know and potentially control the release of their private information. Question 3. A behavior analyst is developing a behavior intervention plan for a child with severe aggression. The plan includes a restrictive procedure. What ethical considerations are most important when including restrictive procedures? A. Restrictive procedures should be the first intervention considered for severe behaviors. B. Less restrictive procedures should be attempted and found ineffective before implementing restrictive ones, and documentation must be thorough. C. Restrictive procedures are unethical and should never be used in ABA. D. Parental consent is the only ethical requirement for using a restrictive procedure. Answer. B. Less restrictive procedures should be attempted and found ineffective before implementing restrictive ones, and documentation must be thorough. This question focuses on the ethical considerations surrounding restrictive procedures in behavior intervention. Restrictive procedures, while sometimes necessary for severe, dangerous behaviors, carry significant ethical weight and should not be the first line of defense. Ethical guidelines mandate that behavior analysts prioritize less restrictive alternatives and implement restrictive procedures only when less restrictive options have been tried, documented as ineffective, and thorough justification and procedural safeguards are in place, including proper authorization. Client consent is necessary, but not the sole ethical requirement. A careful hierarchy of interventions is crucial. A good rule of thumb is to always climb the least restrictive ladder, only moving up to more intrusive methods when lower steps haven't worked, and always document your climb. Question 4. A behavior analyst receives a gift of significant monetary value from a client's family at the conclusion of services. What is the most ethical course of action? A. Graciously accept the gift to maintain the therapeutic relationship. B. Politely decline the gift and explain the professional boundary regarding gifts of value. C. Accept the gift but donate it to a charity. D. Accept the gift and report it to their supervisor. Answer. B. Politely decline the gift and explain the professional boundary regarding gifts of value. This scenario addresses the ethical guideline regarding accepting gifts from clients. Behavior analysts must avoid conflicts of interest and refrain from engaging in relationships that could impair their objectivity or create an unequal power dynamic, and accepting gifts of significant value from clients falls under this concern. While the family's intention may be kind, accepting a gift of significant monetary value can blur professional boundaries and potentially influence professional judgment, so it is generally considered unethical. The most ethical approach is to respectfully decline the gift while explaining the importance of maintaining a professional relationship free from potential conflicts, which preserves boundaries and integrity. Keeping professional boundaries clear helps ensure the focus remains purely on providing effective services. Question 5. A behavior analyst is supervising a behavior technician who is struggling to implement a specific procedure correctly. The behavior analyst is very busy and provides minimal feedback during supervision sessions, assuming the technician will eventually figure it out. Is this ethical supervision? A. Yes, as long as the technician is licensed or certified. B. No, supervisors have an ethical obligation to provide timely, specific, and performance-based feedback and ensure supervisee competence. C. Yes, technicians are responsible for their own learning. D. Yes, if the technician is billing for their time, they should be independent. Answer. B. No, supervisors have an ethical obligation to provide timely, specific, and performance-based feedback and ensure supervisee competence. This question tests the ethical responsibilities of supervisors in ABA. The keyword struggling to implement, paired with minimal feedback, highlights a failure in the supervisory process. Supervisors have a clear ethical duty to provide effective training and supervision, which explicitly includes giving frequent, constructive, and performance-based feedback to help supervisees improve and become competent. Simply leaving a struggling supervisee to figure things out is a direct violation of the ethical standards for supervision. Effective supervision is a critical component of ethical practice, ensuring that services provided by supervisees meet professional standards. Providing clear, constructive feedback is not optional. It's an ethical requirement to help supervisees grow and provide quality services. Question 6. A behavior analyst creates social media content discussing general principles of ABA and common behavioral strategies. They ensure client-specific information is never shared. Is this practice ethical? A. Yes, as long as no client information is shared and the content is accurate and within their expertise. B. No, behavior analysts should not use social media professionally. C. Yes, but only if their employer approves every post. D. Yes, but they must get consent from a regulatory board before posting. Answer. A. Yes, as long as no client information is shared and the content is accurate and within their expertise. This question explores the ethical use of social media by behavior analysts. Behavior analysts can ethically use social media for professional purposes like education, but they must adhere to strict guidelines to protect client confidentiality and maintain professionalism. The most important ethical consideration is absolutely avoiding the sharing of any identifiable client information, even inadvertently. Additionally, the content shared must be accurate, based on science, and within the behavior analyst's scope of competence. As long as confidentiality is protected, accuracy is maintained, and the content is professional and within their area of expertise, using social media for educational purposes is permissible. Think of social media as a public forum. You can share general knowledge, but never reveal anything personal about your clients. Question 7. A behavior analyst is asked to provide an opinion on a client they assessed 2 years ago. The client's situation has likely changed since then. What should the behavior analyst consider ethically? A. Provide the opinion based on the old assessment data, as it is the only information available. B. Decline to provide an opinion based on outdated data. C. Provide the opinion but state that the data is old. D. Conduct a new assessment before providing an opinion. Answer: D. Conduct a new assessment before providing an opinion. This question tests the ethical requirement for behavior analysts to base their recommendations and opinions on current data and assessments. Relying on outdated information, assessed 2 years ago, situation has likely changed. When providing a professional opinion is ethically questionable because it may no longer accurately reflect the client's current status. Ethical practice demands that professional opinions and recommendations are grounded in current, relevant data to ensure they are accurate and beneficial to the client. Therefore, the most ethical course of action is to conduct a new assessment to gather up-to-date information before offering any professional opinion or recommendation. Always ensure your professional advice is based on the most current understanding of the situation, just like a doctor wouldn't diagnose based on lab results from years ago. Question 8. A behavior analyst working in a school setting is asked by a teacher for specific details about another student's behavior plan, as the teacher is curious. The behavior analyst does not work directly with that other student but knows their behavior plan. What is the ethical response? A. Share the plan details, as they both work in the same school. B. Share general strategies from the plan but not specific client details. C. Decline to share any information about a client they do not directly serve, citing confidentiality. D. Ask the teacher why they need the information before deciding. Answer: C. Decline to share any information about a client they do not directly serve, citing confidentiality. This scenario highlights the ethical principle of maintaining client confidentiality, particularly regarding information shared with third parties, even within a school setting, information about a specific client. Another student is confidential and should only be shared with individuals who have a legitimate need to know for the benefit of that specific client and with proper consent. Sharing a student's behavior plan details with a teacher who is merely curious and not directly involved in implementing that student's plan violates confidentiality. The ethical action is to politely decline the request, explaining that client information is confidential and can only be shared with those directly involved in the client's care and with appropriate authorization. Client confidentiality means protecting their information and only sharing it on a need-to-know basis with authorized parties. Question 9. A behavior analyst discovers that a colleague is consistently using a non-evidence-based intervention that is potentially harmful to clients. What is the behavior analyst's ethical obligation? A. Ignore it, as it is not their direct responsibility. B. Report the colleague immediately to the ethics board. C. First, attempt to resolve the issue informally with the colleague, if appropriate, before considering formal action. D. Discuss the issue with their supervisor only. Answer: C. First, attempt to resolve the issue informally with the colleague, if appropriate, before considering formal action. This question addresses the ethical responsibility to address suspected ethical violations by colleagues. Ethical guidelines typically recommend attempting to resolve concerns about a colleague's conduct through informal means first, such as a direct conversation, provided the potential violation is not causing immediate harm and informal resolution seems possible. If informal resolution is unsuccessful or inappropriate, example, due to severe potential harm or lack of responsiveness, the behavior analyst is then ethically obligated to take further action, which may include reporting to the appropriate authorities or ethics board. Ignoring the issue is unethical, and immediately reporting without attempting informal resolution, when appropriate, might bypass a chance for correction. The ethical code encourages colleagues to address concerns professionally, starting informally when safe and possible, before escalating. Question 10. A behavior analyst is designing a behavior intervention plan and considering various procedures. Ethically, which characteristics should be a primary consideration when selecting intervention procedures? A. The procedure that is easiest to implement for the staff. B. The procedure that has the strongest empirical support and is likely to be effective and least restrictive. C. The procedure that the client's parent prefers, regardless of empirical support. D. The procedure that the behavior analyst is most familiar with. Answer: B. The procedure that has the strongest empirical support and is likely to be effective and least restrictive. This question focuses on the ethical selection of intervention procedures in ABA. Behavior analysts are ethically required to use evidence-based practices, strongest empirical support, that are effective and consider the least restrictive options, necessary to achieve the desired outcomes. While ease of implementation, parent preference, or analyst familiarity might be practical considerations, they do not override the ethical obligation to prioritize interventions with demonstrated effectiveness based on scientific evidence, and those that infringe least upon the client's rights and freedom. Ethical intervention planning is rooted in science and client welfare, guiding the choice towards proven and minimally intrusive methods. Always ask yourself, is this the most effective, evidence-based, and least intrusive way to help my client? Question 11. A behavior analyst is asked to provide services to a client who is a friend of a close family member. What is the primary ethical concern in this situation? A. The behavior analyst may be too emotionally invested, creating a potential conflict of interest that could compromise objectivity. B. The family member might interfere with treatment. C. The client may expect preferential treatment. D. It is generally acceptable as long as boundaries are clearly stated. Answer: A. The behavior analyst may be too emotionally invested, creating a potential conflict of interest that could compromise objectivity. This question addresses the ethical guidelines regarding multiple relationships and conflicts of interest, providing professional services to individuals with whom you have a close personal relationship, either directly or through close family ties. Friend of a close family member creates a dual relationship. The primary ethical concern is that this personal connection can impair the behavior analyst's objectivity, judgment, and effectiveness, leading to a conflict of interest. Ethical standards advise avoiding such relationships where possible to maintain professional integrity and ensure decisions are based solely on the client's best interest, free from personal bias. Maintaining professional distance helps ensure your decisions are always made based on data and client needs, not personal feelings. Question 12. A behavior analyst is developing a consent form for a new client. What information is ethically required to be included in the informed consent process? A. Only the cost of services and the scheduled times. B. The nature of the services, potential risks and benefits, alternative treatments, and the right to withdraw consent at any time. C. The behavior analyst's resume and references. D. A guarantee of specific treatment outcomes. Answer: B. The nature of the services, potential risks and benefits, alternative treatments, and the right to withdraw consent at any time. This question tests the components of ethical informed consent. Informed consent is a cornerstone of ethical practice, ensuring clients or their legal guardians fully understand and agree to the services provided. Ethically required elements of informed consent include a clear explanation of the proposed procedures, nature of the services, potential positive and negative outcomes, potential risks and benefits, discussion of other available options, alternative treatments, and clearly stating that participation is voluntary and can be discontinued at any time. Right to withdraw consent. Informed consent is about empowering the client by giving them all the necessary information to make a truly informed decision about their care. Remember, consent must be truly informed, meaning the person understands what they are agreeing to, including the potential downsides and other options. Question 13. A behavior analyst is providing telehealth services to a client in a different state. The behavior analyst is licensed in their home state, but not in the state where the client is receiving services. Is this practice ethical? A. Yes, as long as they maintain confidentiality during the session. B. No, behavior analysts must comply with licensing requirements in the jurisdiction where services are provided. C. Yes, if the client provides consent. D. Yes, if the services are supervised by a local behavior analyst in the client's state. Answer. B. No, behavior analysts must comply with licensing requirements in the jurisdiction where services are provided. This question addresses the ethical and legal requirements for practicing across state lines, particularly relevant with the rise of telehealth. A critical ethical and legal obligation for behavior analysts is ensuring they meet all applicable requirements, including licensing and regulatory standards, in the specific jurisdiction where they are providing services, regardless of where the analyst is physically located. Providing services via telehealth to a client in a state where the analyst is not licensed violates these jurisdictional rules. Consent and supervision are important, but do not override the need for proper authorization to practice in that state. Always check the rules of the place where the client is receiving services, not just where you are sitting. Question 14. A behavior analyst working with a client needs to collaborate with the client's speech therapist. What is the ethical procedure for sharing client information with the speech therapist? A. Share any information deemed relevant without formal consent, as it is for the client's benefit. B. Obtain informed consent from the client or guardian, specifically for sharing information with the speech therapist. C. Share only non-confidential information, like general progress updates. D. Only share information if the speech therapist is also a behavior analyst. Answer. B. Obtain informed consent from the client or guardian, specifically for sharing information with the speech therapist. This question focuses on ethical information sharing when collaborating with other professionals. While collaboration with other professionals like speech therapists is often beneficial and necessary for comprehensive client care, client information is confidential. Ethically, behavior analysts must obtain specific, informed consent from the client or their legal guardian before sharing any confidential information with other parties, including other professionals involved in the client's care. This consent should specify what information can be shared and with whom. Client consent is the key to unlocking the ability to share confidential information, even when collaborating for their benefit. Question 15. A behavior analyst is asked to provide expert testimony in a legal case related to a former client. Ethically, what should guide the behavior analyst's testimony? A. Advocate strongly for the former client's position, as they were their therapist. B. Provide truthful, objective testimony based on their data and professional expertise within the scope of their competence. C. Refuse to participate, citing confidentiality. D. Shape the testimony to support the party who is paying for their expert witness services. Answer. B. Provide truthful, objective testimony based on their data and professional expertise within the scope of their competence. This question addresses the ethical responsibilities of behavior analysts when acting as expert witnesses. When providing testimony, the behavior analyst's ethical obligation shifts from advocate to impartial expert. They must provide honest and objective information based solely on their professional knowledge, data, and expertise related to the case, without advocating for any particular side or being influenced by who retained them. While confidentiality is important, a court order, like a subpoena, can compel testimony, and the analyst must then provide truthful information. The role of an expert witness is to educate the court with factual information, not to take sides or manipulate facts. Remember, your duty is to truth and objectivity when acting as an expert, not to the client's or hiring party's desired outcome. Question 16. A behavior analyst learns that their employer's billing practices appear fraudulent. What is the behavior analyst's ethical obligation? A. Continue billing as instructed by the employer as they are an employee. B. Immediately report the employer to the relevant funding sources and regulatory boards. C. First, attempt to resolve the issue with the employer through appropriate organizational channels, if possible, before taking external action. D. Document the concern but take no further action. Answer: C. First, attempt to resolve the issue with the employer through appropriate organizational channels, if possible, before taking external action. This question addresses the ethical responsibility when encountering potentially unethical or illegal practices within one's workplace, specifically regarding billing. Ethical standards require behavior analysts to address concerns about organizational practices that conflict with ethical obligations. The initial step often involves attempting to resolve the issue internally through established organizational policies or by speaking directly with management or supervisors, provided this is feasible and safe. If internal resolution is unsuccessful or inappropriate for the severity of the issue, external reporting to relevant authorities, like ethics boards or funding agencies, becomes necessary. While it's important to document everything, simply documenting without taking action is insufficient. Ethical practice sometimes requires speaking up about wrongdoing, starting internally if safe and possible before going public. Question 17. A behavior analyst is asked to design an intervention to eliminate a behavior solely because it is annoying to the caregivers, even though the behavior is not harmful or interfering with the client's learning or social interactions. Ethically, should the behavior analyst proceed? A. Yes, because caregiver preference is the most important factor. B. No. Behavior change goals should prioritize the client's needs, safety, and overall welfare, not solely the convenience of others. C. Yes, if the caregivers provide informed consent. D. Yes, if the behavior is easy to change. Answer: B. No. Behavior change goals should prioritize the client's needs, safety, and overall welfare, not solely the convenience of others. This question tests the ethical principle of benefiting others and ensuring goals are appropriate and client-centered. Behavior analysts must ensure that the goals of their interventions are selected based on their potential benefit to the client, focusing on behaviors that are socially significant, improve the client's life, and promote their independence and well-being. Simply eliminating a behavior solely because it is annoying to others, without it being harmful or interfering with the client's functioning, does not meet the ethical standard of acting for the primary benefit of the client. Ethical practice requires prioritizing the client's welfare and choosing goals that truly matter for them. Always ask, is this goal truly for the client's benefit and well-being, or is it just for someone else's convenience? Question 18. A behavior analyst is developing a research study involving human participants. What is the most important ethical consideration for the behavior analyst? A. Ensuring the study will produce significant results. B. Obtaining informed consent from all participants, or their guardians, and protecting their welfare and rights. C. Publishing the results in a peer-reviewed journal. D. Minimizing the cost of the research. Answer: B. Obtaining informed consent from all participants, or their guardians, and protecting their welfare and rights. This question focuses on ethical considerations specific to conducting research involving human participants. The paramount ethical responsibility in human research is protecting the welfare, dignity, and rights of the participants. This includes obtaining voluntary, informed consent after fully explaining the study's purpose, procedures, risks, and benefits, and ensuring participants understand they can withdraw at any time. While scientific rigor, publication, and cost-effectiveness are important aspects of research, they are secondary to the ethical imperative of safeguarding human participants from harm and respecting their autonomy. In research, the well-being and informed decision-making of the people involved always comes first. Question 19. A behavior analyst working in a private practice receives a referral for a client who is a relative of their significant other. Ethically, what should the behavior analyst do? A. Accept the client but maintain strict professional boundaries. B. Decline the client due to the potential for a conflict of interest and multiple relationship. C. Accept the client if the significant other agrees. D. Accept the client if the relative is not a close relative. Answer. B. Decline the client due to the potential for a conflict of interest and multiple relationship. This scenario is another example dealing with potential multiple relationships and conflicts of interest. Providing services to someone who has a close connection to a significant person in your personal life. Relative of their significant other creates a multiple relationship. This relationship can easily compromise the behavior analyst's objectivity and professional judgment, leading to a conflict of interest. Ethical guidelines strongly recommend avoiding such relationships to protect professional integrity and ensure the client's interests remain the sole focus. When personal and professional worlds intersect closely, it's often best to keep them separate to avoid potential problems. Question 20. A behavior analyst is asked to use a new experimental intervention procedure that has very limited empirical support, but is popular in online parent forums. The behavior analyst has no formal training in this procedure. What is the ethical response? A. Implement the procedure as requested by the parent, as they have the right to choose interventions. B. Implement the procedure but document that it is experimental. C. Decline to use the procedure and explain why it is not supported by evidence and falls outside their scope of competence. D. Seek a brief online tutorial and then implement the procedure. Answer. C. Decline to use the procedure and explain why it is not supported by evidence and falls outside their scope of competence. This question tests the ethical principles of using evidence-based practices and practicing within one's scope of competence. Behavior analysts are ethically obligated to rely on scientifically supported interventions. Limited empirical support for the new procedure is a red flag. Furthermore, they must only implement procedures for which they have received appropriate training, and supervision has no formal training. Implementing an experimental procedure based solely on popularity, without evidence or training, is unethical and potentially harmful. The ethical course is to decline using the unsupported procedure, explain the importance of using evidence-based methods, and state that it is outside their area of expertise. Stick to what the science supports and what you are trained to do. Popular trends without evidence are not ethical guides for intervention. Question 21. A behavior analyst discovers a significant error in a client's billing records from several months prior. What is the ethical obligation regarding this error? A. Ignore it, as it happened a long time ago. B. Correct the error promptly and notify affected parties, example client, funding source, as required by regulations and ethical guidelines. C. Hide the error to avoid potential penalties. D. Discuss it with a colleague but take no action. Answer. B. Correct the error promptly and notify affected parties, example client, funding source, as required by regulations and ethical guidelines. This question addresses the ethical principle of integrity and correcting errors in professional records, particularly billing. Behavior analysts have an ethical obligation to maintain accurate records and to be truthful and honest in all professional activities, including billing. Upon discovering an error, regardless of when it occurred, the ethical requirement is to correct it promptly. Furthermore, depending on the nature of the error and relevant regulations, it may be necessary to inform the client and/or funding source about the correction. Honesty and accuracy in record keeping and billing are non-negotiable ethical duties. When you find a mistake, own it, fix it quickly, and tell anyone who needs to know, because integrity means being honest even when it's uncomfortable. Question 22. A behavior analyst is supervising a student who is completing their practicum requirements. The student informs the behavior analyst that they feel uncomfortable implementing a specific procedure outlined in the client's behavior plan. What is the supervisor's ethical responsibility? A. Require the student to implement the procedure anyway, as it is in the plan. B. Dismiss the student from supervision for being uncooperative. C. Discuss the student's concerns, assess their competence and understanding, provide additional training support, or modify the plan assigned if appropriate and ethical. D. Tell the student to figure out how to feel comfortable on their own. Answer: C. Discuss the student's concerns, assess their competence and understanding, provide additional training support, or modify the plan assigned if appropriate and ethical. This question focuses on the ethical responsibilities of a supervisor towards their supervisee, particularly when the supervisee expresses discomfort or lack of confidence. A supervisor has an ethical obligation to ensure their supervisees are competent and feel supported and safe in their learning environment. When a supervisee expresses discomfort with a procedure, the supervisor must take this seriously. Assess the underlying reasons, example, lack of training, ethical concerns, emotional discomfort, provide necessary guidance or training, and make appropriate adjustments to the supervision or the client's plan if warranted and ethical. Effective supervision involves teaching and supporting, not just assigning tasks. When a supervisee raises a concern, it's an opportunity for teaching and ensuring safety and competence. Question 23. A behavior analyst is providing services in a small community. The behavior analyst is invited to a client's birthday party. Accepting the invitation would likely lead to increased personal interaction outside of the professional relationship. What is the most ethical decision? A. Attend the party to strengthen rapport with the client and family. B. Politely decline the invitation to maintain professional boundaries and avoid a potentially compromising multiple relationship. C. Attend the party but avoid interacting with the client or family. D. Accept the invitation only if other professionals working with the client will also be there. Answer: B. Politely decline the invitation to maintain professional boundaries and avoid a potentially compromising multiple relationship. This scenario again addresses the ethical principle of avoiding multiple relationships, particularly in small communities where such overlaps are more likely. Attending a client's personal event like a birthday party creates a multiple relationship that can blur the lines between professional and personal roles. This can potentially compromise the behavior analyst's objectivity, create a conflict of interest, or negatively impact the professional dynamic. The most ethical approach is to politely decline such invitations, clearly and kindly explaining the importance of maintaining professional boundaries to ensure the professional relationship remains focused solely on the client's therapeutic needs. Keeping professional boundaries clear helps everyone involved understand the nature of the relationship and maintains objectivity. Question 24. A behavior analyst is reviewing data for a client and notices that the intervention is not showing the expected progress. Ethically, what is the primary responsibility of the behavior analyst? A. Continue the intervention unchanged for a longer period, assuming it will eventually work. B. Discontinue services immediately. C. Analyze the data to determine why progress is not occurring, modify the intervention based on the analysis, and communicate findings and changes to the client guardian. D. Blame the lack of progress on the client or caregivers. Answer C. Analyze the data to determine why progress is not occurring, modify the intervention based on the analysis, and communicate findings and changes to the client guardian. This question highlights the ethical obligation to use data to guide clinical decisions and ensure effective treatment. When data show a lack of progress, intervention is not showing the expected progress. Behavior analysts are ethically required to evaluate the situation systematically, analyze the data to determine why, make necessary adjustments to the intervention based on that analysis, modify the intervention, and keep the client or guardian informed, communicate findings and changes. Failing to analyze data and modify the plan when needed is unethical because it means the client is not receiving effective, data-driven treatment. Data should always tell you what to do next. If something isn't working, the data should prompt you to figure out why and make a change. Question 25. A behavior analyst is asked to provide services to a child whose parents have differing views on the goals and methods of intervention. Both parents are legally entitled to make decisions regarding the child's care. Ethically, what is the behavior analyst's best approach? A. Choose the parent whose views align most closely with the behavior analyst's own. B. Only work with one parent and disregard the other's input. C. Facilitate discussion between the parents to reach a consensus or seek guidance, example, legal counsel, clinical supervisor, if consensus cannot be reached and it impacts treatment effectiveness. D. Implement separate, potentially conflicting plans based on each parent's wishes. Answer C. Facilitate discussion between the parents to reach a consensus or seek guidance, example, legal counsel, clinical supervisor, if consensus cannot be reached and it impacts treatment effectiveness. This question addresses the ethical challenge of working with multiple caregivers who may disagree on treatment approaches, especially when they share decision-making authority. Ethically, the behavior analyst must attempt to work collaboratively with all parties involved in the client's care who have the legal right to consent. Facilitating communication and helping the parents reach an agreement on goals and methods is crucial for consistent and effective intervention. If consensus proves impossible and significantly hinders treatment, seeking supervision or legal guidance on how to proceed while prioritizing the client's best interest is necessary. Navigating disagreements among caregivers requires skill, and prioritizing consensus or seeking help when needed to ensure the client receives consistent, agreed-upon care. Question 26. A behavior analyst is considering using physical restraint as an emergency procedure for a client engaging in severe, dangerous self-injury. What ethical requirement is paramount before implementing such a procedure, even in emergency situations? A. It must be included in the client's behavior intervention plan with clear criteria for use and fading, and requires specific consent authorization. B. It can be used at any time the behavior analyst deems necessary to stop self-injury. C. It only requires verbal consent from a caregiver in the moment. D. It should be the preferred first response to severe self-injury. Answer A. It must be included in the client's behavior intervention plan with clear criteria for use and fading, and requires specific consent authorization. This question concerns the ethical use of restrictive and potentially dangerous procedures like physical restraint, even for emergencies. While emergency situations may arise, the ethical use of restraint is heavily regulated and requires proactive planning. Restrictive procedures must be clearly defined within the client's behavior plan, including the specific conditions under which they can be used, how their use will be monitored, and a plan for reducing or eliminating their need. Fading. Crucially, the use of such procedures requires explicit informed consent and authorization from the client or guardian before the emergency arises. Emergency procedures don't negate the need for planning, authorization, and clear parameters outlined in the client's plan. They emphasize the need to have these safeguards in place before a crisis occurs. Question 27. A behavior analyst receives confidential information about a client from a former service provider without the client's consent for release of information. What should the behavior analyst do? A. Use the information if it seems clinically relevant. B. Decline to accept the information and inform the former provider that consent is required before sharing. C. Accept the information but don't document it. D. Contact the client to inform them the information was received without consent. Answer. B. Decline to accept the information and inform the former provider that consent is required before sharing. This question addresses the ethical responsibility regarding unsolicited confidential information. Accepting confidential information about a client from a third party when the client has not provided consent for that specific sharing of information can compromise client confidentiality and ethical practice. The ethical course is to refuse the unsolicited information and inform the person attempting to share it that proper consent must be obtained from the client or their guardian before any confidential details can be exchanged. Protect client confidentiality by only accepting information that you are authorized to receive. If someone tries to give you confidential information about a client without proper consent, you must refuse it to uphold ethical standards. Question 28. A behavior analyst wants to use client data for a professional presentation. What must the behavior analyst do ethically regarding confidentiality? A. Obtain written consent from the client guardian to share the data in a presentation, ensuring anonymity is maintained. B. Share the data if all identifying information is removed without needing consent. C. Only use hypothetical data in presentations. D. Get permission from their employer only. Answer. A. Obtain written consent from the client guardian to share the data in a presentation, ensuring anonymity is maintained. This question focuses on the ethical use of client information for professional purposes like presentations. Even if identifying details are removed, using client data for presentations still requires explicit informed consent from the client or their legal guardian. While maintaining anonymity is crucial, consent allows the client to decide if their clinical information can be used for purposes beyond their direct treatment, such as professional education or presentation. Relying solely on the identification without consent is generally insufficient for using clinical data publicly. Anytime you want to use client information outside of their direct care, you need their permission first, even if you plan to remove names. Question 29. A behavior analyst is providing services to a child in their home. The child's parent frequently disrupts sessions, questions the behavior analyst's methods aggressively, and implements conflicting strategies when the analyst is not present, negatively impacting the child's progress. The behavior analyst's attempts to collaborate and provide parent training have been unsuccessful. What is the most ethical course of action? A. Continue providing services, hoping the parent's behavior will change. B. Terminate services immediately without explanation. C. Discuss the ongoing challenges with the parent, clearly outlining the impact on the child's progress and setting clear expectations or criteria for continuing services, and potentially prepare for ethical termination if the situation doesn't improve. D. Report the parent to Child Protective Services. Answer. C. Discuss the ongoing challenges with the parent, clearly outlining the impact on the child's progress and setting clear expectations or criteria for continuing services, and potentially prepare for ethical termination if the situation doesn't improve. This scenario addresses the ethical challenge of providing effective services when caregiver behavior impedes progress and collaborative efforts fail. While termination of services is a last resort, behavior analysts are not ethically required to continue providing services when doing so is ineffective or potentially harmful due to circumstances outside their control, such as significant lack of caregiver cooperation. The ethical process involves attempting to resolve the issue through clear communication and setting expectations. If resolution is not possible and the situation prevents the client from benefiting, ethical termination procedures, including providing notice and potential referrals, must be followed. Ethical practice requires working towards effective outcomes, and sometimes that means addressing barriers directly with caregivers, and if necessary, ethically ending services when those barriers cannot be overcome. Question 30. A behavior analyst creates a personal social media profile that includes photos and information about their clients without their consent, believing it helps potential clients see their work. Is this ethical? A. Yes, as long as the photos are not close-ups and faces are obscured. B. No, sharing client information or images on personal social media without explicit consent is a clear violation of confidentiality and ethical guidelines. C. Yes, if the behavior analyst truly believes it benefits their practice. D. Yes, if the client is a minor and the parent consented only verbally. Answer. B. No, sharing client information or images on personal social media without explicit consent is a clear violation of confidentiality and ethical guidelines. This question directly addresses the ethical imperative to protect client confidentiality, especially in the context of personal social media. Sharing any information, including photos or videos, that could potentially identify a client or provide details about their treatment on personal social media without specific, informed, and often written consent from the client or their guardian is a serious ethical violation. Personal social media should remain separate from client information to safeguard privacy and maintain professional boundaries. Your personal social media should never be a place where you share anything about your clients. Their privacy is paramount. Question 31. A behavior analyst receives a request to change a client's behavior plan goals solely based on a payer source's requirement for specific outcomes, even though those outcomes may not be the most clinically appropriate for the client at this time. Ethically, how should the behavior analyst respond? A. Change the goals as requested by the payer source to ensure continued funding. B. Discuss with the payer source and client guardian the importance of clinically appropriate goals based on assessment data, even if they differ from payer preferences, and advocate for the client's needs. C. Implement the payer-preferred goals but continue tracking data on the clinically appropriate goals privately. D. Terminate services because the payer source is interfering with clinical judgment. Answer. B. Discuss with the payer source and client guardian the importance of clinically appropriate goals based on assessment data, even if they differ from payer preferences, and advocate for the client's needs. This question tests the ethical responsibility to prioritize the client's needs and clinical judgment over external pressures, such as those from payer sources. While working with funding limitations is a practical reality, behavior analysts must ensure that treatment goals and methods are selected based on the client's individual assessment data and clinical needs, not solely dictated by payer requirements. Ethically, the behavior analyst must advocate for the client's best interests and professional recommendations, explaining to both the payer and the client guardian why the clinically recommended goals are appropriate, even if it involves challenging payer expectations. Client needs supported by assessment data must drive goal selection above administrative or financial pressures. Question 32. A behavior analyst is working with a client who has specific cultural beliefs that influence their family's views on intervention strategies. Ethically, what is the behavior analyst's responsibility regarding these beliefs? A. Disregard the cultural beliefs if they conflict with standard ABA practices. B. Implement standard ABA practices regardless of cultural context. C. Seek to understand and incorporate the family's cultural beliefs and values into the assessment and intervention planning process in a respectful and effective manner. D. Refer the client to another provider who shares the same cultural background. Answer. C. Seek to understand and incorporate the family's cultural beliefs and values into the assessment and intervention planning process in a respectful and effective manner. This question highlights the ethical principle of cultural responsiveness in practice. Behavior analysts are ethically required to consider and respect the cultural context of their clients and their families. This involves actively seeking to understand their beliefs, values, and practices, and integrating this understanding into the assessment and intervention process to ensure services are delivered in a culturally sensitive and effective manner. Disregarding cultural beliefs or imposing standard practices without considering the client's context is unethical and can harm the therapeutic relationship and outcomes. Ethical practice means adapting your approach to fit the client's individual and cultural context, making sure your interventions are not just effective, but also respectful and meaningful to the family. Question 33. A behavior analyst is providing supervision to a friend who is pursuing certification. Ethically, is this arrangement permissible? A. Yes, as long as the behavior analyst is qualified to supervise. B. No, supervising individuals with whom you have a close personal relationship creates a problematic multiple relationship. C. Yes, if the friend is struggling to find another supervisor. D. Yes, if they sign a specific contract acknowledging the friendship. Answer. B. No, supervising individuals with whom you have a close personal relationship creates a problematic multiple relationship. This question specifically addresses the ethical implications of supervising individuals with whom you have a prior or current personal relationship, such as a friend. Supervising a friend creates a multiple relationship where the boundaries between personal and professional roles are blurred. This can compromise objectivity, impair professional judgment, and potentially exploit or harm the supervisee or the clients they serve. Ethical guidelines strongly advise against such supervisory arrangements. Maintaining a professional distance in supervision helps ensure that feedback, evaluations, and decisions are fair, objective, and focused solely on the supervisee's professional development and client outcomes. Friendship and supervision don't mix ethically because the power dynamic and personal feelings can interfere with objective professional guidance. Question 34. A behavior analyst is developing a new program. Before implementing it with clients, what is an essential ethical consideration? A. Ensuring the program is popular with other behavior analysts. B. Evaluating the program's empirical support and potential risks and benefits for the target population. C. Marketing the program aggressively to potential clients. D. Minimizing the cost of implementing the program. Answer. B. Evaluating the program's empirical support and potential risks and benefits for the target population. This question focuses on the ethical responsibility to base practice on scientific evidence when developing or selecting interventions. Before using any program or procedure with clients, behavior analysts are ethically required to evaluate its effectiveness and safety based on empirical evidence, empirical support, and consider the potential positive and negative effects, potential risks and benefits for the specific population they serve. Implementing programs without this critical evaluation is unethical, as it may lead to ineffective or harmful interventions. Ethical practice demands that interventions are grounded in science and carefully considered for their impact on the client. Always check the evidence before implementing something new. Your clients deserve interventions that are proven safe and effective. Question 35. A behavior analyst accepts payment from a client's family in the form of personal services, example, car repair, house cleaning, instead of monetary payment. Is this arrangement ethical? A. Yes, if both parties agree to it. B. No. Behavior analysts should generally avoid bartering for services, as it can create conflicts of interest, exploit the client, and complicate the professional relationship. C. Yes, if the value of the services is equal to the monetary fee. D. Yes, if it is documented in the service contract. Answer. B. No. Behavior analysts should generally avoid bartering for services, as it can create conflicts of interest, exploit the client, and complicate the professional relationship. This question addresses the ethical stance on bartering for professional services. Ethical guidelines strongly discourage or prohibit bartering for services because it can easily lead to conflicts of interest, potential exploitation of the client, given the inherent power imbalance, and complicate the professional relationship by blurring boundaries. Monetary payment for services helps maintain a clear, objective professional relationship focused on the delivery of behavioral services. While documenting it might be a procedural step if bartering were ever considered, the arrangement itself is typically considered unethical. Keep your financial arrangements clear and professional. Bartering can open the door to ethical complications. Question 36. A behavior analyst uses humor during sessions that sometimes includes making jokes about the client's behaviors, thinking it lightens the mood. Is this ethical? A. Yes, if the client seems to laugh. B. No, behavior analysts must treat clients with dignity and respect, and making jokes about their behaviors, especially those targeted for change, is disrespectful and undermines client dignity. C. Yes, if the jokes are not mean-spirited. D. Yes, if the client's family is present and also laughs. Answer. B. No, behavior analysts must treat clients with dignity and respect, and making jokes about their behaviors, especially those targeted for change, is disrespectful and undermines client dignity. This question touches on the ethical principle of treating clients with dignity and respect. Making jokes about a client's behaviors, even with good intentions, is inherently disrespectful and can undermine the client's dignity, especially since the behaviors are often the reason they are receiving services. Ethical practice requires maintaining a professional and respectful demeanor that upholds the client's worth and autonomy at all times. Humor should never come at the expense of a client's dignity or be directed towards their struggles. Always treat your clients with the utmost respect. Your interactions should build them up, not potentially shame or mock them, even subtly. Question 37. A behavior analyst is writing a report and struggles to find objective language to describe a challenging client behavior, resorting to subjective and judgmental terms. Ethically, what should the behavior analyst do? A. Write the report using the subjective terms, as they accurately reflect the analyst's feelings. B. Seek supervision or consultation on how to describe behavior objectively and professionally. C. Omit describing the behavior altogether. D. Use euphemisms to soften the description. Answer. B. Seek supervision or consultation on how to describe behavior objectively and professionally. This question relates to the ethical requirement for accuracy and objectivity in professional documentation. Behavior analysts must use objective, measurable language when describing behavior and clinical situations in reports and records. Resorting to subjective or judgmental terms, subjective and judgmental terms, is unprofessional and violates the ethical standard for accurate and responsible documentation. If a behavior analyst struggles with this, the ethical course is to seek guidance from a supervisor or colleague to develop the skill of writing objective, behavior analytic descriptions. Professional language in documentation must be factual and free from personal bias or judgment. Describing behavior objectively is a core skill in ABA. If you struggle with it, seek help to ensure your reports are accurate and professional. Question 38. A behavior analyst is developing a program to decrease a challenging behavior. Ethically, what should be included alongside the procedures to decrease the behavior? A. Procedures for increasing one or more appropriate replacement behaviors. B. Punishment procedures that are easy to implement. C. Only procedures to decrease the challenging behavior. D. A discussion of the client's negative personality traits. Answer. A. Procedures for increasing one or more appropriate replacement behaviors. This question highlights the ethical principle of focusing on constructional approaches and teaching functional alternatives. Ethical behavior reduction plans in ABED do not solely focus on eliminating a behavior. They must also include procedures to teach and reinforce one or more functionally equivalent replacement behaviors that serve the same purpose for the client in a more appropriate way. Simply suppressing a behavior without teaching a functional alternative is often ineffective in the long run and ethically questionable, as it leaves the client without a way to meet their needs. Ethical behavior reduction always involves teaching the client what to do instead of just focusing on what not to do. Question 39. A behavior analyst is asked by a family member of a potential client for advice on their child's behavior during a casual social gathering. The behavior analyst has not assessed the child. What is the ethical response? A. Provide general advice based on their expertise. B. Decline to provide specific advice about the child's behavior without a formal assessment and professional relationship, citing ethical guidelines. C. Ask the family member for a video of the behavior and provide advice based on the video. D. Suggest specific intervention strategies they can try immediately. Answer. B. Decline to provide specific advice about the child's behavior without a formal assessment and professional relationship, citing ethical guidelines. This scenario addresses the ethical boundary regarding providing professional advice without a formal professional relationship and proper assessment. Giving specific behavioral advice or recommendations about an individual without having conducted a thorough assessment and established a formal client-professional relationship is unethical. Such advice is not based on sufficient information, may be inaccurate or inappropriate, and blurs professional boundaries. The ethical course is to politely decline providing specific advice, explain the importance of a proper assessment, and perhaps offer information on how to seek professional services. Giving professional advice requires a professional context and adequate information. Casual advice is generally not appropriate. Question 40. A behavior analyst is offered a bonus payment by a client's family if the client meets a specific, difficult-to-achieve goal by a certain date. Is accepting this offer ethical? A. Yes, as long as it motivates the behavior analyst. B. No. Contingent payments based on specific outcomes can create a conflict of interest and compromise objectivity and the client's best interest. C. Yes, if the goal is clinically appropriate. D. Yes, if the bonus is documented. Answer. B. No. Contingent payments based on specific outcomes can create a conflict of interest and compromise objectivity and the client's best interest. This question addresses the ethical issue of receiving payments contingent upon client outcomes. Accepting bonuses or payments that are dependent on a client achieving specific results by a deadline creates a significant conflict of interest. This arrangement can pressure the behavior analyst to prioritize reaching that outcome and securing the bonus over using the most appropriate, individualized, and data-driven approach for the client, potentially compromising the client's welfare. Fees should be based on the services provided, not tied to specific behavioral outcomes. Financial incentives tied to outcomes can cloud your clinical judgment. Ethical payment is based on the services you provide, not whether the client reaches a specific goal by a deadline. Question 41. A behavior analyst is using a reinforcement procedure that involves giving the client access to a highly preferred toy. The client's parent expresses concern that the client is getting too much access to the toy. Ethically, how should the behavior analyst respond? A. Ignore the parent's concern, as the analyst is the expert. B. Immediately stop using the toy as a reinforcer. C. Listen to the parent's concern. Explain the rationale for using the toy as a reinforcer based on data, and collaborate on how to address their concerns while maintaining the intervention's effectiveness. D. Tell the parent they can take over managing the reinforcement if they don't like it. Answer. C. Listen to the parent's concern. Explain the rationale for using the toy as a reinforcer based on data, and collaborate on how to address their concerns while maintaining the intervention's effectiveness. This question emphasizes the ethical principle of collaboration with stakeholders and maintaining communication. Parents and caregivers are vital members of the client's team, and their concerns must be heard and addressed respectfully. Ethically, a behavior analyst should listen to the parent's feedback. Listen to the parent's concern. Explain the clinical reasoning behind the intervention choice using data. Explain the rationale based on data. and work together with the parent to find a solution that respects their perspective while ensuring the intervention remains effective. Collaborate on how to address their concerns. Open communication and collaboration are key to building trust and ensuring successful outcomes. Always remember that working with families, not just for them, is essential for ethical and effective practice. Question 42. A behavior analyst completes services with a client. After termination, the client's parent asks the behavior analyst to be friends on social media. What is the ethical consideration? A. Accepting the friend request is acceptable because services have ended. B. Declining the friend request is necessary to maintain professional boundaries, even after termination, due to the previous professional relationship. C. Accepting the friend request is acceptable if the behavior analyst makes their profile private. D. Accepting the friend request is acceptable if the client was a minor. Answer. B. Declining the friend request is necessary to maintain professional boundaries, even after termination, due to the previous professional relationship. This question addresses the ethical boundaries that persist even after professional services have concluded, specifically regarding social media contact. Due to the power imbalance and the intimate nature of the therapeutic relationship, initiating or entering into a personal relationship, like becoming friends on social media, with a former client or their immediate family immediately after termination is generally considered unethical. It can blur professional boundaries that are important to maintain, potentially exploit the former client, or negatively impact any future need for professional services. Maintaining clear boundaries, even post-termination, is crucial for preserving the integrity of the professional relationship. Professional relationships have a lasting impact, and maintaining boundaries afterwards helps protect both parties and the integrity of the profession. Question 43. A behavior analyst is asked to use a behavior reduction procedure that is very effective, but known to cause significant discomfort or distress to the client. Ethically, what must the behavior analyst consider? A. Effectiveness is the only ethical consideration. B. The potential distress must be carefully weighed against the severity of the behavior and the potential benefits of reduction, prioritizing the client's welfare and seeking least restrictive alternatives first. C. Client assent is not necessary if the procedure is effective. D. Payer source approval is the only requirement. Answer. B. The potential distress must be carefully weighed against the severity of the behavior and the potential benefits of reduction, prioritizing the client's welfare and seeking least restrictive alternatives first. This question addresses the ethical challenge of balancing effectiveness with potential negative impacts on the client, such as discomfort or distress. Ethically, behavior analysts must consider not only the effectiveness of a procedure, but also its potential risks and impact on the client's welfare, dignity, and rights. Procedures that cause significant discomfort or distress should only be considered for severe behaviors, after less intrusive methods have been tried and failed, and the potential benefits of reducing the behavior clearly outweigh the risks and discomfort. The client's well-being and using the least intrusive effective methods are paramount. Effectiveness alone does not justify a procedure. You must always weigh the potential benefits against the potential harm and discomfort to the client. Question 44. A behavior analyst is supervising multiple trainees. One trainee consistently arrives late for supervision sessions and is unprepared. What is the ethical obligation of the behavior analyst supervisor? A. Ignore the behavior, as the trainee is paying for supervision. B. Terminate supervision immediately. C. Address the behavior professionally with the trainee, outlining expectations, documenting the issue, and implementing corrective actions if necessary. D. Reduce the length of the supervision session. Answer. C. Address the behavior professionally with the trainee, outlining expectations, documenting the issue, and implementing corrective actions if necessary. This question focuses on the ethical responsibilities of supervisors to manage the supervisory relationship professionally and ensure the quality of supervision. When a supervisee exhibits unprofessional behavior, consistently arrives late, unprepared, the supervisor has an ethical obligation to address it directly and professionally. This involves communicating expectations clearly, documenting the performance issues, and implementing a plan for improvement or corrective action, which may include consequences if the behavior persists. Simply ignoring the issue or terminating supervision without attempting to resolve it is not consistent with ethical supervisory practice. Supervising includes managing the professional relationship and addressing issues proactively and constructively. Question 45. A behavior analyst is asked to provide services to a client whose parents are requesting a treatment intensity, hours per week, that the behavior analyst believes is significantly insufficient to meet the client's critical needs based on assessment. Ethically, what should the behavior analyst do? A. Agree to provide services at the requested intensity, as the parents have the right to choose. B. Decline to provide services due to the ethical concern that the prescribed intensity is inadequate for meaningful progress, after discussing their concerns with the parents and explaining the recommended intensity. C. Provide services at the requested intensity, but inform the parents that progress will be slow. D. Accept the case but bill for more hours than agreed upon to compensate for the low intensity. Answer. B. Decline to provide services due to the ethical concern that the prescribed intensity is inadequate for meaningful progress, after discussing their concerns with the parents and explaining the recommended intensity. This question addresses the ethical responsibility to provide services that are likely to be effective and to advocate for the client's needs regarding treatment intensity. Behavior analysts should only accept cases where they can provide services that are likely to be beneficial based on the client's needs and the evidence base. If the requested intensity is professionally judged to be significantly insufficient to make meaningful progress, it is ethical, after clearly communicating the assessment findings and recommended intensity to the parents, to decline the case if they cannot agree to an appropriate level of service. Providing services known to be inadequate for achieving significant outcomes is not in the client's best interest. You have an ethical duty to recommend and strive for the level of service the client needs to make meaningful progress. If that's not possible, declining might be the ethical choice after discussion. Question 46. A behavior analyst uses social media to solicit testimonials from current clients. Is this ethical? A. Yes, testimonials are a good way to promote services. B. No, soliciting testimonials from current clients is an ethical violation due to the power imbalance in the professional relationship. C. Yes, if the testimonials are anonymized. D. Yes, if the behavior analyst's employer allows it. Answer. B. No. Soliciting testimonials from current clients is an ethical violation due to the power imbalance in the professional relationship. This question specifically tests the ethical guideline regarding soliciting testimonials. Behavior analysts are ethically prohibited from soliciting testimonials from current clients or anyone else who, because of their particular circumstances, are vulnerable to undue influence. This is because the power dynamic inherent in the professional relationship can make it difficult for a current client to refuse a request for a testimonial, potentially leading to coercion or exploitation. Even after services end, there are restrictions on soliciting testimonials from former clients who are still vulnerable. Avoid asking current clients for public endorsements. The professional relationship has a power dynamic that makes true consent difficult. Question 47. A behavior analyst is asked to implement a behavior program that requires frequent, brief physical guidance to prompt a skill. The client has a history of trauma related to physical touch. Ethically, how should the behavior analyst proceed? A. Implement the program as written, as physical guidance is a common ABA technique. B. Decline to use procedures involving physical touch due to the client's history of trauma and collaborate with the team Guardian to develop alternative, trauma-informed strategies. C. Use physical guidance, but try to make it as brief as possible. D. Use physical guidance but avoid documenting the client's reaction. Answer B. Decline to use procedures involving physical touch due to the client's history of trauma and collaborate with the team Guardian to develop alternative, trauma-informed strategies. This question highlights the ethical imperative to consider client history and potential harm, particularly in the context of trauma-informed care. Given the client's history of trauma related to physical touch, using procedures involving physical guidance is ethically problematic and potentially re-traumatizing, even if it's a standard technique. Ethically, the behavior analyst must prioritize the client's safety and well-being. This requires acknowledging the trauma history, avoiding potentially triggering procedures like physical prompts, and collaborating with the treatment team and Guardian to develop alternative, less intrusive strategies that are sensitive to the client's trauma. Client safety and history must always inform procedure selection, especially regarding potentially sensitive interventions. Question 48. A behavior analyst is providing supervision to a supervisee. The supervisee records supervision sessions without informing the supervisor. Is this ethical? A. Yes. Recording sessions is helpful for the supervisee's learning. B. No. Recording professional interactions, including supervision, typically requires the knowledge and consent of all parties involved. C. Yes, if the supervisee promises not to share the recordings. D. Yes, if the recordings are only for personal review. Answer. B. No. Recording professional interactions, including supervision, typically requires the knowledge and consent of all parties involved. This question addresses ethical conduct within professional relationships, specifically regarding the recording of interactions like supervision. Recording conversations or sessions without the explicit knowledge and consent of all individuals involved is generally considered unethical, as it can violate privacy and trust. In a supervisory relationship, mutual respect and transparency are essential. Therefore, a supervisee recording supervision sessions without the supervisor's knowledge and agreement is not ethical practice. Professional integrity requires being transparent about recording, always getting consent from everyone involved. Question 49. A behavior analyst is asked to sign off on supervision hours for someone they did not adequately supervise because the individual is a friend of a colleague. Ethically, what should the behavior analyst do? A. Sign the hours as it helps the individual and is a favor to a colleague. B. Decline to sign the hours because it would be dishonest and a violation of ethical supervision requirements. C. Sign the hours but document that the supervision was inadequate. D. Sign the hours but inform the regulatory board later. Answer. B. Decline to sign the hours because it would be dishonest and a violation of ethical supervision requirements. This scenario directly tests the ethical principles of honesty, integrity, and responsible supervision. Signing off on supervision hours that were not actually provided or were inadequately provided is a clear act of dishonesty and a direct violation of the ethical and regulatory requirements for supervision. This undermines the integrity of the certification process and potentially puts clients at risk by vouching for someone who may not be competent. The ethical imperative is to be truthful and only attest to supervision that was genuinely and adequately provided. Falsifying documentation, including supervision hours, is a serious ethical breach. Be honest and uphold the integrity of the certification process by only signing for hours you truly provided ethical supervision for. Question 50. A behavior analyst is discussing a client's progress with the client's parents. The behavior analyst uses complex technical jargon that the parents clearly do not understand. Is this ethical communication? A. Yes, using technical terms demonstrates the behavior analyst's expertise. B. No, behavior analysts must communicate with stakeholders using language they can understand to ensure informed participation and collaboration. C. Yes, if the parents have access to a dictionary. D. Yes, if the behavior analyst is short on time. Answer B. No. Behavior analysts must communicate with stakeholders using language they can understand to ensure informed participation and collaboration. This question focuses on the ethical requirement for clear and understandable communication with stakeholders. Behavior analysts have an ethical obligation to communicate information, including assessment results, treatment plans, and progress updates, in language that is easily understood by the client, parents, or guardians. Language they can understand, using excessive technical jargon, complex technical jargon that is not understood impedes informed consent, collaboration, and the parent's ability to participate effectively in their child's care. Effective ethical communication prioritizes clarity and comprehension for the listener. Your goal is to make complex ideas accessible, not to impress with jargon. Clear communication builds trust and helps everyone understand and participate in the client's plan.